What's the creepiest thing you've seen in broad daylight? Suicide at the Hoover Dam. He bounced all the way down. Not quite broad daylight but more like dusk. I look out my front window and see a lump on my lawn that looks out of place. I think, that really looks like a dude in a ghillie suit on my front lawn. I keep staring at it and become more and more convinced it is a dude in a ghillie suit. And I start to freak out a bit and don't know what I am supposed to do in this situation. Like, do I call the cops? Then a bunch of neighborhood kids run up to the lump and the actual factual real dude in a ghillie suit gets up. It was an older kid or a dad or something playing hide and seek in a ghillie suit. The creepiest thing for me was when I was out surfing in Northern California. It's really cold dark water and I was out by myself. I was sitting there waiting for a wave and my leash felt like it was caught up, which it does sometimes. I like to fix it before a wave comes so there's no hindrance when I go to stand up. Well, I pull at it a little and it feels like seaweed or something's on it. I turn towards the back of my board and there is something on it, a harbor seal who's sitting on the back of my board laying on my leash. Scared the fuck out of me, but me screaming scared the fuck out of him and it went back into the water and I paddled in. I know it's not the creepiest thing in this thread, but it definitely scared me pretty good. I work, security, at a hospital. I really just sit outside of the construction zone where they're doing remodeling and make sure homeless people and teenagers don't get in. But I'm also sat right outside the door they use to take the bodies out. There's just something eerie about how discreet and impersonal it is. Not that I expect there to be some sort of fanfare when someone dies. But they're just wrapped in quilts or thick blankets, quietly loaded up into an unmarked van and that's it. It's a major hospital, so there's several bodies wheeled out every day. Worst is when you know it's a child, but I thankfully don't see much of that. They tend to wait until the middle of the night so less people see, so they don't upset people. Always just strikes this weird feeling in me when I see them. Edit. I should also say that there is a bit of fanfare if they're an organ donor. The doctors and nurses will line up along the hall when they take them out and have just a little moment of silence. Like a way to express their thanks for this person inevitably helping someone else. Very bittersweet. I watched a murder of crows follow a Toyota Corolla into a mall parking lot. The car parked, and a greasy-looking middle-aged man got out. He beelined for the mall entrance without once making eye contact with the crows who were now following him. At the last second before entering the mall, he tossed a big handful of peanuts over his shoulder and the crows went wild. It seemed less like the man was controlling the crows, and more like the crows were controlling him. A man on the sidewalk looked around and then pulled down a ski mask and crept into a building as I drove past. In summer. Was taking the subway one day. A lady was walking around chugging a massive bottle of hot sauce. Bloodshot eyes, tears streaming down her face. Of course she sat next to me on the two-seat bench. At first she was complimenting my nails and then she just started staring at me, much too close for comfort. She still had tears down her face, still chugging the hot sauce. I made a comment asking if it was good or something. She acted like I was crazy for noticing it. This was at least 2 years ago and I still can't get her face out of my mind. Hope she's doing well. Got lost driving through Montana and wound up in the middle of nowhere. Saw a small town, maybe 15 buildings total, and figured I'd ask for directions. As I got closer, I saw that it looked like it was abandoned, houses all dilapidated and in disrepair. But every house had a shiny new car in front of it. Not sure what it was about, but my GF and I both got real bad vibes from it and just drove right past. I saw a man speeding around a busy grocery store parking lot, windows rolled down, screaming at the woman who was in the passenger seat. He kept speeding up, braking, and was screaming at her the whole time. I called the cops and watched her do a rolling jump out of the lifted truck right when the cops pulled into the parking lot. We used to take an old back road that would take us to town where I lived a while ago. It was a 20 to 30 minute drive. It was an old stretch of road that was an old worn road that went through a stretch of trees, a small burst of houses surrounded by farmland and fields, so it was very rural area. There is a train track that cuts through, and an unkept road that goes off to the side on the right. One evening we went down the road, there was a car. I want to say an old Honda. I couldn't tell. that was parked off on that little road to the side. I saw them and thought, odd, because the road led to nowhere, it just stopped a few feet away. We came back much later in the day. Night had fallen and the car was still sat there. A few days later we find that the car had been linked to a murder. Apparently the car belonged to a woman who had been missing. Her boyfriend beat her and left her in a shallow grave. The car he abandoned and left there while her child was at school. Her name was Nyesha Nelson. I was like 10 and kept hearing a thumping noise from our garage. Thought it was an animal or something. I found my bio mom covered in blood and convulsing from an OD, and she had fell and cut her stomach open somehow. It was truly like a movie. The light was shining on through the windows beyond the garage door and illuminating just her. She lived after I took care of her for 4 hours until an ambulance showed up, which is a whole story. Shush is still a POS. But it was like 9 a.m. Not the way I wanted to start my day. Popped into Asda to buy some lunch one day and there was a guy vomiting blood in the car park onto a car bonnet. He then proceeded to rub his face in it. We locked eyes across the car park and he grinned this wide, knowing smile with blood in his teeth, on his face and in his hair. Didn't go back there for weeks. Grimsby Asda, IYKYK. Driving down the 5 in California, I saw a car drift across the center divide. It's a massive highway in the middle of nowhere with a big grass divide, maybe the equivalent of 3 to 4 lanes wide, and directly into a semi-truck going the other way. I was probably 2 to 3 cars behind the drifting car. Neither vehicle had hardly any chance to brake. It happened over the course of maybe 2 seconds. It literally exploded into pulverized dust. No flames or fire. Just a massive explosion of glass, metal, paint, and, presumably, the occupants. The semi shuddered horribly, but with its massive inertia, it seemed to lose very little forward momentum. Happened so fast we were past it in seconds. The poor person must have fallen asleep at the wheel or something. I was sitting outside, having coffee, journaling in an tucked away spot downtown. Some junkie decided to join near me and proceeded to lift up his pant leg and itch what was essentially his bone. His leg was in total decay. Most of his shin had been rotting away. I looked at him and asked if he wanted me to call an ambulance or get him some care. He met my eyes, kinda groaned and just stared and itched. I got freaked out and just left. I was like 15. I was a few blocks away from a hospital and clinics, so I figured he wasn't too far from help if he chose it. Many years ago I saw a bush, behind another bush, while walking in my neighborhood. Except it wasn't a bush, and it was peeking out from around a corner. It was moving. Then it was gone. It wasn't unlike that scene in Halloween where Laurie sees Michael Myers and he hides behind a bush and sneaks away. It was something my brain could not interpret but chose to see as a bush. I was around 11 or 12, middle of the day, wide awake, not under the influence of any drugs. It was weird and scary, and comes to me as déjà vu sometimes. When I was about 8 years old, I was walking down the sidewalk in Toronto when 3 young long-haired guys in their late teens or early 20s ran past us laughing and fooling around. I didn't think of it at the time being a child, but it appeared they might have been drunk. Just after they passed by, I heard a loud screeching of brakes and a thud. I turned to see one of the men sliding down the road on his face. He flew about 20 yards before hitting the ground. A Harley rider almost ran over him and crashed his bike, avoiding the man. They approached him. He wasn't moving at all. The Harley rider took one quick look at him and took off his t-shirt and covered his head. From whatever he saw, he could clearly see the man was gone. His 2 other friends were just staring in stunned shock, not saying a word. It was 1970. I was waiting for a bus very early one morning and a very high and dirty prostitute walked up to me, lifted her dress exposing her vag and said, "No money, no honey." Crackheads fucking in a bus stop shelter. Not even really going at it, just humping and looking around like they're drinking coffee. A guy drove up next to me as I was talking a walk around my neighborhood and asked for directions. The road he named was the next road down, and I told him so. What made it creepy was that the next words out of his mouth were a request to get in his truck and guide him. I was a 15-year-old, but I'm a stick of a person even now. I knew if this guy decided to stop and grab me, I had no chance of getting away, so I did what anyone would probably do. I told him no and because I was on a section of sidewalk directly behind my house, cut through the backyard and booked it inside. I locked every door I could and called my dad to find out if he was working out that day, and ask him to skip if he could. My poor father came home and immediately showed me where the emergency release is in his trunk, and how to find the button to turn off brake lights. I'd heard the "don't go into a stranger's car" line so often growing up I honestly thought it was another myth to scare kids into not wandering around. It's up there with a bear encounter as one of the scariest things I've experienced. Driving by the casino bus that hit a sign and was cut open like a can opener on I-95 INY in 2011. White sheets covering bodies everywhere, 14 dead. RIP. Went to eat at a restaurant. The hostess, elderly lady, sat us at our table, said, "Enjoy your meal," and proceeded to drop dead right there. I don't know about creepy, but for sure shady. I was in an extremely uncrowded Chinese restaurant. It was just me and the staff, sit-down place, not a strip mall joint, when a very large, very well-dressed man came in and went and sat at the bar. He ordered an orange juice and nothing else. The OJ never came, but a minute later the bartender handed him a brown paper bag and he left. It's not creepy but crazily confronting and scary. I saw a horse run over a guy. Horse wasn't even going full pelt either, so it made me really aware just how strong, and if they want to be, dangerous, horses are. Guy had to go to the hospital but not sure what happened to him. Nearly 20 years ago, I was walking with two friends downtown Winnipeg, going to a record store. We pass an alley and a homeless person is walking out of this narrow alley holding in his hands what appears to be a cooked dog's head. When I was working at McDonald's in high school, I was getting ready to pull into the parking lot for my shift and there was a lot of snow on the ground. This older lady, who's probably late 60s, early 70s, gets out of her Ford Taurus in a dress. She then proceeds to grab one of the door handles of McDonald's, hike up her dress and shit right by the door. She pulled her underwear off and left them right there for back into her car and left. I was watching this all from my truck and was gagging. I proceed to walk in to clock in and my manager asks why I'm late. I told them what happened and to pull up the cameras. One of the managers threw up in the office and the other told me to grab a bucket and mop to clean it. It took 3 buckets of mop water and soap to clean it. Then I quit right after. All of this was at like 2 p.m. on a Saturday. On holiday, check into a hotel, clearly different from what the website said. The hotel was worst for everyone except me. The worst was the hotel owner who followed us, but keeping his distance so my parents wouldn't notice. He was eyeing me up and licking his lips. Every time I turned, there he was, watching me. He was mid-40s at least. I was 12. Another time at the beach alone surfing when I was also about 12, another creepy old man literally walked up to me and sat on my towel, watching me surf in a swimsuit. He was asking really weird questions, and found it strange out of me and a few solo teenage boys he chose me to sit with. May have been innocent, but I had a gut feeling. Made my excuses and quickly ran away. He asked if I'd be at the beach tomorrow. I lied and said yes. I never went to the beach alone again. But late to the party, so doubt anyone will see this. But by far the creepiest thing I've ever seen wasn't anything supernatural but just the ugly truth about how selfish and uncaring people truly are. This incident broke me in a way none of the other life-threatening incidents and deaths I've dealt with ever could. I was going home from a late Friday night shift. About midnight. On a super well-lit, busy station on one of the most populated commuter lines in England. Quite a few people around. The train comes up and stops. Right in front of me are the doors, and a guy is leaning against them. He was bald and in an expensive suit. Looked like he was probably a middle-aged London businessman who had stayed in London for a few after work. Well, he'd fallen asleep or passed out leaning against the doors. The doors open and he falls backwards. I sidestep out of instinct. He was quite tall and the train doors are about a foot above the platform, so his head must have fallen about 7 or 8 foot before it thudded into the concrete platform with a wet thud. I'll never forget the look of shock as we made eye contact for a brief second as he fell past me, confused and scared like someone who's just woken up from a bad dream. Then spout. Gone. I'm still in my work mindset, pub bouncer, so immediately rush to try and offer first aid. He's out cold but still breathing. His feet are still in the doors. The doors are closing on his feet over and over. I'm trying to talk to him and wake him up, but nothing's happening. Blood is slowly trickling out his ears. I've been in other situations like this, I know what that means. The commuters getting off the train are stepping over him and walking off to the taxi rank. The commuters left on the train are drunk. They're laughing at him. My phone is dead. I can't call an ambulance. Nobody around me cares, or at least any more than to laugh at a dying man and mock him. I'm knelt by him screaming for help or a mobile phone. More commuters walk past just staring at us. The conductor of the train comes to see what's stopping the doors. I tell him to call an ambulance. He refuses, says it's not policy or some shit. I can barely believe what I'm hearing. The conductor tells me to move his feet out of the door so the train can keep going. I scream that the man's got a neck and back injury, and if the conductor moves him I'll break his nose, then testify against him when the police inquiry into the commuter's death happens. He scoffs at me and says the company gets fined £1,000 a minute if they're late, and hurries back down the train to radio his control room what to do. To this day I hope he fucking gets cancer, the useless cunt. Eventually some Pierce Brosnan looking commuter stops and gives me his phone. I call 999 and get an ambulance en route. The drunk ones on the train are all staring and looking, laughing and telling stupid jokes, harassing me that they're late now and to just move him off the train so they can go home. I'm getting properly heckled and abused verbally by the traingoers on one side. The guy who gave me his phone has stepped well away. The guy on the floor's breathing is becoming more and more shallow. There's more and more blood coming from his head. I'm trying to relay everything to the ambulance operator. I hear the sirens down the road over all the noise from the train. More screaming and heckling. The operator is saying something and it all goes quiet like it was faded out in a movie, and I hear this guy take his last breath. 2 seconds. 3. 4. Not breathing. I start chest compressions and feel tears running down my cheeks. Suddenly I'm pushed out the way by a paramedic and they get an oxygen mask and one of those hand pump things on him. I try to explain the situation, but they grab him within a minute of arriving and are wheeling him off. I hand the guy his phone back and he looks white as a sheet. The cuffs of my white shirt are a dark red. The train conductor comes back, having watched all this from about 5 cars down the platform, doing his best not to get involved, and takes the safety lock off the open doors. I step on the train and nobody in the carriage will say anything or make eye contact with me. It's silent for the next 3 stops. I get off and walk down the platform. The conductor won't make eye contact with me. I never found out if they managed to resuscitate the guy. I'd wager money against it though. Stopped working security after that. Went through some PTSD counseling for that and a few other life-altering, ending incidents I was first responded to. Never fully got my faith in the goodness of humanity back. Such a senseless, stupid way to go. Out of maybe 150 people who saw it, I was the only one to do anything, and maybe the guy who gave me his phone. Still fucking detest London commuter types. I went to school in a rough part of town with a large homeless population. One day I was walking to the bus stop and the police had shown up. Poor guy had died of hypothermia right there in the streets, curled up in a ball outside the front of shop. Less disturbing and more heartbreaking. If you have money to spare, please go to a second-hand or dollar store. Buy hats, mittens, scarves, keep them with you in the car, and if you see somebody without proper winter gear, help them out. You don't have to spend a lot of money to help the homeless. Even the bare necessities could save a life. I went on a school field trip as a teacher to the Bahamas. We took 16 students to the island and kayaked all over the place. At some point, our guides took us into open water and had us basically kayak between islands these long distances apart. Not only was there a long sequence where the water was extremely choppy, but at some point it was decided I had to be the adult in the back of the party to watch all the students as they kayaked. I was by myself in a 2-person sea kayak behind all these other people, and for whatever reason my foot slipped off the rudder. I could not get it back on easily. The kayak was a little short for me and I was spraining my ankle trying to just bend my leg in this small cramped space to get that foot back on the pedal. And while I'm doing this, my kayak was being pushed and turned by the waves as I watched almost everyone paddling further and further away into the distance. I yelled, but the closest people to me were the youngest students and none of them heard. Watching them just going further and further as the sun started setting in the distance was the fucking scariest moment of my life. Yes, I survived. But I still have nightmares about that moment and have never felt comfortable around open water since. The church from Silent Hill in real life. Funny how the land surrounding it really did look cursed. Smiley face. I was driving down a long road through the woods and there was a guy standing on the side of the road holding an axe. No other car around and no houses around. Just the guy, standing there, with an axe. About an hour later I was driving back the other way on the same road. The guy was still there, still holding the axe. Two crackheads fighting over a Happy Meal.